want to please sit down, we'll be starting very soon.
So we have to track our strategy is like how to work which are growing markets, where there's decarbonization. So all it's quite interesting. Right? You're good. Add me on LinkedIn, yeah.
Cheerio. Yes, please.
Yeah.
Ela é atacada do Columbia. Fica bom, assim? Ah, tipo, linda. Esse menino. Ó. Vou mandar.
Bom dia. Welcome to CEBRI's program on critical minerals, unlocking a low-carbon future. Look, if we want to transition to a low-carbon economy, it's vital that a supply of critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, manganese, nickel, graphite, to name a few, that all of this is available as feedstock to facilitate the manufacturing of batteries for EV use, complementing wind and solar through storage-related facilities. And if we don't have those critical minerals, we don't have the batteries. And in the United States, we have lithium in Nevada. We get a lot of it from China. And we're also mindful of what's in the southern cone of South America, what's in Mexico, and how important it is to get some of those feedstocks to the U.S. and to other parts of the world. So I think on behalf of Holland Knight, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this wonderful program and to welcome you all to this great program. So I wanted to say thank you for coming. I know there's going to be a wide variety of speakers coming here. Some of them are not here yet, but when they arrive, they'll be introduced. And it gives me great pleasure in introducing now Rafaela Gedges, and who can take it from here for this wonderful program.
Good morning.
Listening? Yeah. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure to be here today. I'd like to start by thanking our hosts, that Holland Knight, also Verano, that is within CEBRI and helped us bring this bridge together. Also, Columbia Wilson Center, our partners. So thank you. And thank you for the distinguished audience for being with us here today. I know it has been crazy to arrive, and that's why we're starting a few minutes late. So today in the morning, while deciding how should I do like this opening remarks, and having my dose of caffeine, I was thinking, should I start by remembering the planetary crisis, the hottest days that we have seen happen, record history this year, the record-setting floods that are happening, the raging fires, wildfires, and of course the forest fires in Brazil? Or should I also remember that we are way behind what we pledged within the SDGs? But then I said it's bad to start this way, and let's try to be a bit more optimistic and understand that this is a transition, that we know that we are lagging behind, but there is a lot to be done, and that critical and strategical minerals, or better said, like the minerals that will be necessary for the transition, is important to pave that way, to unlock, unleash them, and but above all, how do we do this in a sustainable way, in a way that includes society, includes the communities, and brings together development and prosperity? So it is a huge challenge, and that's what our panel is about today. And it's a multidimensional challenge. We must acknowledge that in the past it has been linked to environmental degradation, to greenhouse gas emissions, to geopolitical tensions, and a lot of instability. Not to mention that we have, and everybody that is in this room works or really understands what we are mentioning in terms of the importance and at the same time the challenges. And we can mention all kinds of risks that bump together with the critical minerals. So that said, what we really want to do here today is to bring these different perspectives. And with that, I will start by presenting Lígia Noronha, which is head of the United Nations Environmental Program at the New York office. And for those who hasn't read, I did my homework. I read it recently. This incredible report that brings some important principles that should be taken into consideration when dealing and evolving in the exploration of these minerals. So, Lígia, please. Or is yours?
Morning, and thank you for inviting me, Rafaela. Thank you to CEBRI, thank you to Holland Knight for hosting us. It really is a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure because this topic is such an important topic, given the climate transition, climate change, and the concerns with it, and the energy transition that we're going to speak to. I would like to put certain ideas in front of you. You may agree with them or not, but I just felt that given that this is International Relations Institute and you are all private sector people involved with this, it's a good opportunity to also engage your minds in issues which Rafael has already started talking about. So, the global landscape of critical minerals in the context of decarbonization scenarios is one of scale and urgency and also concentrated supply. The resources are not concentrated, but the current supply is concentrated, and that's what makes a difference. According to the IEA, the decarbonization scenarios to achieve a 1.5-degree goal will involve growth in demand, which will almost triple by 2030 and quadruple by 2040. With demand to grow by over 40 times for lithium, 20 to 25 times for graphite, cobalt, nickel, and more than double for copper. This will involve many new mines by 2025 over those in 2022. Estimates include 80 new copper mines, 70 new lithium mines, 70 new nickel mines, and 30 new cobalt mines by 2035. That's within 10 years from now. So imagine what this means in terms of the pressure of investments to the local environment, to people and their lives in mineral-rich countries, of which Brazil is one. And yet, this is what we require for the 1.5-degree goal. It's important. The concentrated supply and the urgency and scale for the transition can and is resulting in geopolitical competition, local tensions, and trust deficits. Resources and minerals have often been the reasons for why nations have fought wars. This is not new. So the conflicts and competitions have been happening over the years if you just look through history. These conflicts are also evident within countries, between states and non-state actors, and with local communities. So the trust deficit actually goes down at various levels. With critical minerals to address climate change, a common existential threat provides us with an opportunity and an imperative to do things differently. With an opportunity to change the narrative of minerals for wealth creation through modes of extraction, tit for tat trade wars, possible resource competition and conflict, to a narrative of goods that serves a public purpose, of unlocking a low-carbon future, but importantly, through more collaborative paths. What makes these paths more desirable and warranted is the urgency and scale of this demand. But it's this urgency and scale that also shouts out for justice and equity to be woven into the paths that we want to follow in order to address this existential threat. Critical minerals should be seen as a way to bring us together for a common low-carbon future, because we have a common threat that we seek to address climate change, and not to compete over these minerals for a competitive low-carbon future. The term common has a lot of normative content to it, suggesting a moral imperative linked to benefit sharing, shared concerns, and equal claims. The term future has embedded in it notions of intergenerational sharing, that what is done today has implications for tomorrow and therefore needs to be done in a fair and just manner. So, unlocking this potential of critical minerals for common low carbon and just future requires us to engage with some of the asymmetries and assumptions that underlie the current global landscape. We really need to go beyond just the number game, matching the demand and supply, but really see what's below that. So first, the issue of demand for critical energy transition. While the demand and investments for the energy mix has been rising for renewable energy, how much of it is going to meet the needs of affluent, clean energy transitions, and how much to address energy poverty? This is important to keep in mind, because otherwise we're exponentially increasing the demand for minerals just to meet this exponential growth in renewable energy. But where is it going? How is it being distributed? According to the latest tracking SDG 7 report, 660 million people will still lack access to electricity by 2035, 85% in sub-Saharan Africa. 1.8 billion people will lack access to clean cooking. 6 in 10 people from sub-Saharan Africa. While the flow of investments to support the energy transition has increased significantly, and we're very, very happy with that, it's geographically skewed. Sub-Saharan Africa receives less than 1.5% of the amount invested globally between 2000 and 2020. In terms of per capita investment in renewable energy technologies in 2021, IRENA reported that USA and Europe received 57 and 41 times more investments than Sub-Saharan Africa. The inequality of energy consumption and investment is really clear. And this is important because this defines the demand. Secondly, countries in the LDC and LDCs and LLDC, that's a low and least developed country group, landlocked group, rich in critical energy transition minerals, often do not benefit from the value addition and local development from their mineral wealth. Very often it is just extracted and goes straight to other countries. How is this creating wealth domestically? How is this creating that infrastructure that we need to use this asset in a way that will help build this up? Thirdly, the issue of urgent and scaled supply of minerals in order to address climate change involves a very clear conundrum, and something that UNEP is very much concerned with. 84% of platinum resources, 70% of cobalt resources are located in high-risk ESG contexts, while 65% of lithium resources are located in environments of medium to very high water risk. Of particular concerns are also the rights of indigenous peoples in several of these countries, because many of their lives are where these minerals are located. So, while addressing one environmental crisis, which is climate change, are we creating other environmental local crises? Are we creating a burden? Are we creating human rights infringements? This is really important for us to consider, not just consider a rush to address the mineral demand that we see. This leads me to put forward to this very great gathering here some questions which I hope you will engage with. One, can the critical energy transitional mineral wealth in countries attract investments not only into minerals development for supply, but also into renewable energy infrastructure which addresses the energy poverty? Can we use that leverage? Can the flows of investment and finance into minerals development be aligned with more responsible mining, characterized by longer-term thinking and a vision of shared intergenerational prosperity and responsibility. Can this financing go beyond securing mineral supply, but more importantly, to establish a wider systems change to support green industrial policies, local skills and supply chains, and diversify economic activities at the sub-regional and local level? Do we need to tamper with the scale of mineral demand through a rebalancing of consumption and investments in energy from those who overuse and waste to those who need, so that we are, as Rafaela mentioned in the beginning, addressing the planetary crises that we face? Can this rebalancing happen through material and energy and mobility efficiency, circularity, through sufficiency? Can we design provisioning systems that deliver human needs through using less energy and materials? This is what the International Resource Panel, and we have Isabella Teixeira here, who is the co-chair of the panel, who's been advocating for this, and I'm sure she'll talk to it. Can value created from minerals through circularity and value retention models through the entire value chain also benefit the original owners of the mineral through annuities or other economic instruments that they can use, so that they don't lose out from the value that's created through circularity across the mineral value chain? Ladies and gentlemen, it's in this context that the UN Secretary General set up a panel of experts nominated by governments, industry, and civil society on 26 April 2024 on critical energy transition minerals. Brazil was also represented there. As the UN Secretary General said at that time, a world powered by renewables is a world hungry for critical minerals. For developing countries, critical minerals are a critical opportunity to create jobs, diversify economies, and dramatically boost revenues, only if they're managed properly. The race to net zero cannot trample over the poor. The renewables revolution is happening, but we must guide it towards justice. End of quote. This panel published their or submitted their report, and it's been published on the 11th of September, which is just last week. It proposes 7 voluntary guiding principles. And I just read them out to you. I won't go into the details, but we have copies of those if you would like to, or you can access them on the website. 1, human rights must be at the core of all mineral value chains. 2, the integrity of the planet, its environment, and biodiversity must be safeguarded. Justice and equity must underpin mineral value chains. Development must be fostered through benefit sharing, value addition, and economic diversification. Investments, finance, and trade must be responsible and fair. Transparency, accountability, and anti-corruption measures are necessary to ensure good governance. And lastly, multilateral and international cooperation must underpin global action and promote peace and security. Friends, to deliver on these principles and recommendations, we need collective action and public-private partnerships that serve the common public purpose of transitioning to low-carbon economies, a more peaceful future, and greater justice and equity in the world. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And I forgot to mention when I started that to be able to do this and create different kinds of supply, we at CEBRI, hopefully starting this year, and Isabella will be leading this work, we will be looking closely to Brazil and how can Brazil help with different forms of supply to meet this demand that will grow, and do this in a way that really respects the sustainable development goals and helps to bring prosperity to society abroad. So with that, and within this crazy week, we were tense that is Christopher being able to arrive, and he has just arrived. So we have Christoph McLeod, Head of Energy Supply at the International Energy Agency, which is also a huge and important part of the energy transition. So please, Christoph, the floor is yours. And I will gently ask you if you could put like the mic, because we have several people listening to us online. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be here and to speak with you on behalf of the International Energy Agency. The issue of critical minerals is one that we have been looking at the IEA for a number of years now, and really trying to shine a spotlight on the opportunities that exist, but also the potential blocks that there could be on the energy transition as a result of the availability of critical minerals. We have seen in the past 12 to 18 months that the prices of many of the key critical minerals have come down quite substantially. We saw, for example, a 75% reduction in the price of lithium, cobalt, nickel, graphite. They've all fallen quite substantially from the highs that we saw back in 2021 and 2022. And we should really focus on why we've seen such large price declines. This is going to have a very large impact on companies and on countries that want to produce critical minerals. And we wanted to understand the reasons why, because there is a little bit of a misconception out there that this was because demand is starting to falter, that the clean energy economy is starting to slow down. It's not moving as fast as what people had thought. And this is not correct. Actually, the clean energy economy today is moving even faster than most people really properly appreciate. And the reductions in prices that we've seen for many of the critical minerals is because actually supply has been coming on very, very strongly. We've seen new investments being made. We've seen in lithium, in cobalt, in graphite, and supply growth from many, many different countries, from countries in Africa, Indonesia, China. This has led to an overhang in inventories in many parts of the world. In the context of clean energy development, clearly this has, I said, this has been accelerating very, very strongly. We have seen huge increases in solar PV deployment around the world, in wind, but also over the past number of years, the amount of the batteries that have been deployed have been doubling every single year. So they doubled from 2021 to 2022, and then from 2022 to 2023, and they're likely to double again this year. And batteries are one of the key areas where critical minerals really play such an important role. And the momentum behind clean energy deployment remains incredibly robust, and so demand for critical minerals is also very robust. We see, for example, when we look at individual minerals, total demand for lithium is going to increase by almost a factor of 10 over the next 15 years because of its indispensable role in batteries. Graphite is a close follower with a 5-fold increase, and the demand for nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements are all going to double over the next 15 years. And this suggests while today we see that markets are relatively well supplied, it may not be a very good guide to the future. And we need to have a more medium and long-term future to understand where these markets are going. So we at the IEA have carried out a very detailed analysis to understand the situation that exists for many of the minerals, and we see a mixed picture. We see, when we look at all of the projects that have been announced around the world that are either under construction or at an advanced stage, we see that for copper and lithium in particular, there is a very large gap that is emerging between supply based on announced projects and where demand trends appear to be taking us, given this huge increase that we're seeing in solar PV and in batteries. So, for example, if we assume that all mines that are currently announced come online, and given our existing project, and that's a very big if, that all of those will come about, that would still only meet about 70% of the copper requirements that we have over the next 10 years. So this 30% gap is a very, very large gap when we are thinking about how important copper is for the future of the energy transition. For lithium, actually, the situation is even worse. Only about 50% of the potential demand that we see coming through would be covered with existing projects. When we look at nickel and we look at cobalt, things are slightly better. If all of those projects come through, markets would be tight, but they wouldn't be quite so bad. Graphite, rare earth elements are in a better situation, but they're unlikely to face major supply volume issues. Of course, when we have these gaps that are emerging, this doesn't mean that the energy transition is going to get derailed. It doesn't mean that the energy transition is going to stop happening, but it does highlight where there could be some roadblocks in the way ahead. We need to see more projects coming through, for sure, in all of those four areas, in copper, lithium, nickel and cobalt. But we also need more policies on the demand side. We need governments to pay much more attention to the importance of recycling, for example. Everything that you can recycle will avoid some potential supply that would need to come online. And also promoting more material efficiency measures. Using those rare earth elements in a more efficient way is a very productive mechanism to reduce that gap that exists. The situation on the supply side, well, I mentioned it's good in some places and not so good in others. One area where we do see there being very big risks, and this is always a conversation that emerges when talking about critical minerals, is the geographic concentration that exists for critical minerals today. There is no way around it that China owns a huge amount, the overwhelming majority of the processing and refining capacities that exist for nearly all of the critical minerals that are needed for the energy transition. And actually, that geographic concentration of processing and refining is set to get worse going forward. We have seen a number of countries putting in place great policies to try to diversify their supply chains. We see, for example, in the US, the Inflation Reduction Act has a real emphasis put on developing supply chains for clean energy technologies domestically. We are seeing similar things being undertaken by the European Union. But when it comes to critical minerals, we don't see that these things are making a huge difference on the situation for refining and for processing. And of course, it's also the situation that mining operations are naturally quite geographically concentrated, and it's unlikely to be any major change in that situation going forwards. So, for example, about 3/4 of the announced projects that I mentioned for lithium, for nickel, for cobalt, for rare earth elements, 3/4 of those projects are in the producers that already are the largest producers today. So when all of the projects, or the vast majority of the projects, are being developed where we already have the largest amount of production, clearly things are going to become even more concentrated going forwards. In all projections of the future, the IEA doesn't have a single view of the future. We have a number of different scenarios that could play out depending on whether you believe that governments will achieve the targets they have set themselves on clean energy, whether we will undertake the changes that are necessary to align with 1.5 degrees. Under all of these scenarios, the increasing demand for critical minerals means that there will be a substantial growth in the market value of those minerals going forwards. In fact, we estimate that the market value of minerals will more than double in scenarios which are aligned with our climate objectives. So, for example, if all countries who have made net zero pledges were to achieve that, whether that's net zero in the European Union in 2050, the same in the US, China has a net zero target for 2060, India has one for 2070. If all of those policies are achieved in full and on time, we would see that the market value for critical minerals would grow to about $350 billion by 2040. If we were instead to align all of our objectives around the world with 1.5 degrees, which is the ultimate goal of the Paris Agreement, that market value would go up to $800 billion by 2040. And so that's a huge opportunity that exists, whether that's for producers in Latin America, in Africa, and Indonesia. They're all going to see potentially very large market values to 2040, given the expansions that it would be in copper mining in Latin America and in Africa, but also, for example, due to lithium, increases in lithium and in cobalt for Africa. I mentioned briefly the importance of recycling, and this is an area that the IEA is going to be putting more and more emphasis on going forwards because of that gap that exists between supply and demand going forwards. If you look at recycling rates over the past decade, they have more or less remained stable for critical minerals. They haven't really moved despite an increasing amount of attention that governments have been putting on the issue. But we need those to increase, and in many cases actually to double over the next 10 years if we are to close the gap that exists. There is a huge amount of potential investment into new supply projects that would be avoided if we get that doubling in recycling rates going forwards. And the final topic that I want to finish on, which is a very important one when it comes to miners and to critical mineral production, is on environmental, social, and governance indicators. Because it's important to ensure that new supplies that come online don't come at the cost to local communities or to the environment. The picture that there has been on ESG goals in the past number of years has been very, very mixed. We have seen the industry making progress in some areas, such as worker safety, on gender balance, community investment, and the use of renewable energy to power facilities. But we've actually seen backward steps in a number of areas. When it comes to emissions and water consumption, when it comes to waste generation, unfortunately, the industry is doing worse today than it has done in the past. And this is a big worry when it comes to critical minerals, because if we don't have robust ESG frameworks in place and we don't have companies following those ESG frameworks, there is a real risk for critical minerals and there is a real risk for the overall energy transition. Of course, this is a very complex issue. Businesses with high ESG awareness in their operations can make progress in some areas, but they can struggle to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions due to the declining quality of resources, for example. But it's an area that needs much more attention going forward if we are to get on track for the overall energy transition that is required. I'm going to finish there, but just to really flag that this is an area that I think has been underplayed in the overall importance of the energy transition. As I said at the start, the clean energy transition is occurring. It's occurring very, very quickly, much, much quicker than most people are aware around the world. But one of the issues that we hear being mentioned by policymakers more and more, increasingly in the past 12 months, is the issues that there are with supply chains and with the geographic concentration of critical minerals. So this is a very important conversation to understand the state of play today. But there are huge opportunities that exist for producers, for countries, for companies that can get their act together, that can make the investments that are required, because the size of the prize, as I said, is absolutely huge. I'll finish there. Thank you very much.
So Brazilians being Brazilians, and then I asked if Chris would mind joining us also in this first panel to dynamize. So with that, I will call to the panel. So Isabela Teixeira, these are trustee at CEBRI. He's in the middle. Yes. Emily Olson, our Chief Executive, Chief Sustainability and Corporate Affairs Officer at Vale Base Metals. Christoph, I'll call you again. So Christoph Magblade, Head of Energy Supply at International Energy Agency, and André Clark, Senior VP Latin America at Sims Energy. And I'll be the moderator.
This is resource efficient.
This is resource efficiency. We have heard from Ligia's opening remarks and also Christoph, the huge opportunity, but the hugest challenges we have in place. And we tried to bring in the first panel, you'll see this in the second, a bond of the important people that are dealing with these challenges from different perspectives. And with that, I think that something that was present in the beginning was the huge political challenge of what we have in stake. The concentration of supply, how this is impacting prices, the lack of specific look towards the SDGs and how these minerals are being extracted, human rights, all the issues. So with that, Isabella, the floor is yours to setting the stage in terms of geopolitics.
Yeah, good morning. Are you sure? Okay. Let's see. Thank you very much, first of all, Lígia, for coming. Okay, I think this is really important momentum for us in Brazil, considering not only philanthropy, but also private sector. And it's very important for me personally that organization is closer, must be close. Okay. I will try to be provocative. I don't like to be this, as you know, but I think that we need to discuss transitional minerals, minerals transition in different ways. It's true. I like to play with this, but let's discuss the context that we have today. And of course, as Legion mentioned, we have the debate. And yesterday, I was World Business Council discussing exactly circularity and the protocol awareness. Circularity. Unmute. Yes. No. Thank you. And we were discussing this yesterday with my head of International Resource Panel. So it's very important to come and to understand what's happening today with the extraction of natural resources in the world, the trajectory of the last 56 years, and how complex is the situation for the future. You don't have the availability of natural resource to deal with the demands. That's why circularity is absolutely critical issue, meaning to redefine business model around the world. So for private sector and also for the government, it's very, very important that we can understand which kind of public policies, which kind of limits of public policy you have to promote ambition to decarbonization, consider short-term and long-term perspective. And this means to come into something very interesting about costs and price. Okay, how much the markets, how the markets will prepare to pay for this. Okay, and we know that when you go into these solutions concerning climate change, we demand additional energy, we demand additional materials, it means additional costs, and this means additional price. So it's very important. Nobody discussed this perspective because it's like you need to reach solutions or to have solutions, but not necessarily discussing the financial and economic situation to move the pieces considering the short-term perspective. That's why the costs, the political costs, when you go to discuss phasing out of fossil fuels or transitional waste, is so complex. Okay, and also considering mining sector. Now I'll jump into mining sector. If I can share the numbers of International Resource Panel, I can recommend to read the Global Resource Outlook, our flagship. Is really a good big picture of what's happening today in the last 15 years, and also the scenarios for 2060, and how critical the situation is when you go into the global footprint, meaning the developed countries' footprint, and now, since this century, the emerging economies. So this is really, really important. And why I mention this? Because we need to understand that probably if you go to tackle climate change, that this is my personal comment, okay, this is an unofficial comment, is that we need probably to address solutions considering the critical indices will come around 30 or 40 countries. Okay, they are the critical ones that must change. And we have 196 countries that Paris Agreement members. But what is very interesting when you compare some countries.
Hey, 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 hey. Hey, hey. One,
What
two,
is this?
check this. Yes. I'm testing.
It's ChatGPT, probably.
I'll check.
Alexa, come on.
Did not like that.
It's Peter. It's okay?
So what's happening?
There you go.
So
But we have someone
so what's
together. Would you
happening?
like to dialogue? I don't know what's happening here, the ghost. Okay, but what I'm saying is that when going to discuss the ambition to cut emissions and also to discuss how energy security is not energy transition, we are back discussing energy security. Okay, that's why transition away is really a complex issue. We are back discussing food security. That's why fertilizers in mining sector is absolutely important. We are back discussing really how we go to transportation to promote solution transportation. And again, mining is critical. Mining
Hey,
sector.
hey, 1, 2, mic check.
There is
That's
someone,
walk
invite
around
the
the
guy
room
to
and
come.
just
It's
make
easy.
sure.
I think that this is technology.
I'll be talking right here.
What is this? Okay, I can try without this, but I think it's really difficult.
No, it's going to be, yeah, you have to use.
Okay.
Let's try to see what.
Play again. Go again. So back. What I'm saying that when we go into climate change, probably we have 4 countries that would be very important to go to NDCs. And I'm not sure if the NDCs that will emerge from COP30, they will be financeable. Okay, and this is very important to observe because this means the climate change will overlap with development finance. And this is the issue that matters. We are discussing development as Asia highlighted. Also, we can have human rights and civil rights as part of this equation. And this is very important for our debate because when you go into
That was
climate
happening with the
transition,
microphone. So now I'm just trying to make sure this goes well. My next session. I pray my next session well.
I need to rewind. Okay, trying back. Okay, let's do again. Okay. Okay, let's see. So when going to climate change, I'm talking about NDCs, how financeable, not financeable. But what is very important in this case is 2 issues. To have mining sector on board. We cannot address energy security, we cannot address food security, we cannot go into city solutions, transportation without mines. And this is a really good question. How mining sector will come? This will play as a bridge builder or a change maker. And why? Because we need innovation, technologies, and also we need to understand the geopolitical game. Geopolitics is part of this new arrangement because we not promote solutions blocking countries like China. Okay, and this is very, very interesting because this means that climate change is part of the global new geopolitics arrangement, geopolitical arrangement that's emerging. And this is part of the discussion about the new international order that the United Nations is also part of this. We cannot go into global solutions without multilateral systems. But we need to reframe multilateral systems and to understand the new balance of political force or geopolitical force. And this is based also in technological innovation. This is a critical issue. You cannot do this, you cannot have this mic, you cannot have this without minerals. It's as simple as that. Okay? And absolutely important that you can understand when you have these 40 countries that are very important to cut emissions, to go into investigation, 2 other things. Not necessarily the countries that have today mining sites or mineral sites, they are part of this 40, the set of 40 countries. So we have a new way to approach power in the world. Go to European countries, they don't have critical minerals, strategic sites of critical minerals. It's a new dynamic of international cooperation or international interest, and also, for me personally, additional issue for the lack of trust and transparency. And this is very important because we have some reactions from some European countries. For example, is green protectionism, some supply chains blocking international trade and not able to pay for this. It's impressive how they establish some norms and standards without recognizing the costs and the new prices. So again, we are adding the lack of trust and credibility, and also, I'm not mentioned here, the additional demands of minerals on the going to wars and the weapons and the renewal of the weapons in the world. That's happening today. Okay, check it. It's so easy to check. Okay, so my opinion, when we go into this debate and try to be provocative here, is that we cannot discuss this new momentum of the decarbonization and also supply chains and energy equality, or even including food security, etc., without understanding the dynamics of the new geopolitical game. And this means that climate geopolitics must come into the role. We are discussing not more climate policies, we're discussing climate politics. I'm sorry. We're discussing not more biodiversity, we're discussing nature politics. And this means that we cannot go into developing world, André, and you are CEO, a very important guy in considering this global dynamic. We cannot go into developed country with the same approach that we used to have in the past. It's not a new extractivism. It's not a new exploration of societies. Come on. Come on. The debate is different. And unfortunately, you don't have the political rooms to discuss this. And that's why I think the private sector has the responsibility to understand what are the new issues and how to combine, to connect the dots, if you want to have innovative political and economic narrative to manage from 1.2 to probably 3 to be back to 1.5 Celsius. So it's the other point. We are discussing, negotiating today, not as we used to discuss in the past. No, let's think about 1.5 by the end of the century. No, it's not true. It's happening now. So we need to discuss transition and mining transition, considering climate emergency. And this is also new. This is also new, and we have really some challenges when we go to discuss these issues. And my last point here is only to conclude, is that we need to understand the governance, the climate. That's why climate governance is so important. And based on my experience, and also, I'm not convinced that the environment, the Minister of Environment, have the convenient power to manage this agenda, nationally, regionally, or globally, alone. They are part of the equation, but we demand a new mindset, political mindset, economic mindset, and social mindset, to convene people to be part of the transition if you want to have a transformation. Transition doesn't mean that we need to postpone things, but we need to understand how we go to phasing down and phasing up, and which are the criteria to phasing up solution. It's not clear what you want to do, how you want to manage the mining sector, phasing up solution. Okay, still we discuss incentives, subsidies based on the past. Okay, so we need an alignment between mining sector, energy sector, and also land use / agriculture sector to really understand the opportunities and the trade-offs if you want to play better in short-term perspectives and probably increase the social network in national reality, social network tapping service in the national reality. That's why short-term, we cannot measure, but we can promote better use of trade-offs funds to increase social protection, because we have the trade-offs and we have adaptation as part of the equation. So please don't believe in carbon dreams. Okay, we need to work a lot. I don't believe in low-hanging fruits. Okay? This is good for Newton with the apple, but part of my reality, we need to work hard to make sure that development and emerging economies could connect the dots in an innovative way, and coming with the developed countries and also the vulnerable countries around the world with a new understanding about our challenges. We still are discussing based on the past, even the conditions that we negotiate climate change, the geopolitical ones, the economic ones, the social ones, everything is over, including sustainable development. It's our responsibility as think tanks and also private sector to propose something fresh. I invite you to be disruptive, to propose really something fresh, and to be smart enough to understand that you need to move from now, for probably the next 10 years, to understand what transition means. And Brazil is a country that must improve its governance if you want to be part of the future. If not, we're a good example of the past. Thank you very much.
A real call to action. Before passing to Andre and to Emily, because we'll have like different important adapts here in terms of the technological innovation challenges and the major challenges the industry is facing. I'd like to just ask you, Christoph, if you want to sum up. Isabella's mentioned a lot of complexities within diversifying finance and bringing the right mechanisms in place, and that the history of what we have been doing will not lead us to the future. So if you would like to build upon that.
Certainly, thank you very much. And Isabella made a number of very, very important points there. And there's a couple of reflections as she was speaking. First of all, it is absolutely the case that we are seeing today that geopolitics and trade measures are making the energy transition more challenging in many, many respects.
The goals we come.
And whenever we are looking at trade measures, for example, we have seen tariffs, we're seeing protection measures. There are reasons for that these things are happening. Whenever we look at the clean energy economy that is emerging, many countries want to have a piece of that clean energy economy as it is coming through. There is car manufacturing, from solar panel manufacturing to the traditional fuels. There are many opportunities here that exist, and countries quite naturally want to make sure that they can capture a piece of the clean energy economy as it is emerging. It is absolutely the case, of course, though, that if trade measures are not well designed, they could really slow down the energy transition going forward. One thing that I think is very important to recognize will be where we are seeing the change, some of the changes occurring. If we look at where a lot of the oil and gas resources are today, a lot of the coal resources, many of those countries that hold those also are very well endowed when it comes to renewable energy, for sure. Many of them are very, very sunny, they're very, very windy, they have great hydro resources, they have great bioenergy resources. Also, many of them have excellent critical mineral resources. And diversifying away from traditional fuels, from oil and gas extraction, or from coal extraction into the new clean energy economy is a real opportunity. And you're absolutely right that for critical minerals, they can only be mined in certain places, and those countries really have an opportunity here. What we need to see is action from the producers themselves to make that leap from traditional fuels to the new clean energy economy. But also that will only happen if consuming countries help them to make that transition. We know, for example, that for many countries that are very heavily dependent upon oil and gas revenues today, they will not be able to make a transition away from oil and gas revenues to the clean energy economy unless they receive support from consuming countries. And this can take a number of different factors. Finance is, of course, one that often comes up very, very often, but also in terms of technology, in terms of innovation and support, technical support on the ground to help those economies make the most of the natural resources that they have. It's only with that kind of then working together much more collaboratively are we going to see the transition emerging at the pace that is required. Another thing that consuming countries have to do is be much clearer on the direction of travel. We often hear when people talk about addressing climate change or addressing sustainable development goals, we often see that there is a big gap between the ambition, the long-term targets, and the actual reality on the ground. And many people today are saying that it's not going to be possible to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, and no one believes the consuming countries when they say they will want to achieve net zero emissions. Consuming countries need to be much firmer whenever they are talking about their climate goals, when they're talking about their energy transition goals, so that producer economies get the right market signals. And again, that applies both to traditional fuels and also to critical mineral mining. So that those companies, so that the countries have the security to make the investments that are required. And another very important aspect that you mentioned, and I'll finish on this point, is on the transition that would need to absolutely needs to occur within emerging market and developing economies themselves, those that hold many of the key critical minerals. When we look at the numbers today, we have seen a huge increase in overall clean energy investment over the past 10 years. If we look 10 years ago, just to put a few firm numbers on this, 10 years ago, total investment into energy was about $2 trillion around the world. 1 trillion of that was fossil fuels and 1 trillion was clean. When we look at the numbers for this year, overall investment will be about $3 trillion. Fossil fuels are still about 1 trillion. Clean energy has gone to about 2 trillion. So we've doubled globally clean energy investment over the past 10 years. So that's very, very good news, and hopefully that momentum can continue. But one thing we need to recognize is that the vast majority of clean energy investment today is occurring in advanced economies and in China. In fact, 85% of overall clean energy investment is in advanced economies and in China. So 15%, the remainder there, is occurring in countries that are responsible, that have about 2/3 of the world's population. So there's a huge disparity there that exists between where clean energy investment is happening and where the vast majority of people live. And so what that means is that we need to overcome many of those financial barriers that exist to boost clean energy investment in those emerging market and developing economies. That absolutely is related to boosting investment into reducing the emission intensity of their own energy sectors, deploying solar, deploying wind, deploying other low emission technologies on hydrogen, on electric cars, all of the different options that exist. But also in terms of boosting investment there into critical mineral mining, because that is where we see, again, some of the big gaps that exist. If we keep overall investment at that 15%, we are not going to have global energy transition, and we're certainly not going to have the new technologies, the new minerals that are required for the entire world to change at the pace that's needed. I'll finish there.
So thank you, Andrea. You have been, and I've been a testimony of that, very enthusiastic of Latin America and all the expansions in terms of investment in energy and in technological innovations and really booming up like demand. So from your perspective, could you bring us some light in terms of what's needed with technological innovations that will come along and demand for these new energy? How do you see this? Thank you.
Thank you, Rafaela. Well, I usually say that I speak from the perspective of the kitchen of the energy transition, because we cook and deliver the equipment, the networks, the large machines that the world needs. So we're a global company that does that. Basically, very large machines for the energy transition. So the first thing, so basically, really two ideas. The machines that we need for renewable energy are far more resource intensive than the old machine. A gas-fired turbine that lasts usually for 100 years. Basically, is a very large piece of metal that spins for a long time. When you transition into solar or into wind, which are machines more or less of half of the size of this room, first of all, these machines last at best 10 years. The solar panels that we're seeing being deployed everywhere will last 10 years, maybe less, because of the technology ramp up. All that garbage will go somewhere, and we will begin to see a struggle on where to put them. This is where the resource planning and the circular economy needs to be debated in a much more serious way. Today, the stuff we see is unmentionable. So that's number one. So it is the idea of full supply chains, which are much more resource intensive than the past. That was not enough. The grid behind it, the whole large transmission, power transmission system will grow 3-4-fold. IEA has been helping the world on trying to forecast the grid expansion. We've been very bad at doing this, I would say. The grid will expand, for instance, in this country by 3 times. It used to be, for instance, in the US, a system where we would transport molecules, burn the molecules near the consumption. We now transport electrons. For that, you need a lot of grid. That's a huge machine of basically a very special steel surrounded by copper in long lines made by copper or aluminum. So that's a lot. So the first impact of energy transition is a huge press on resources which are, in our view, completely underestimated. It is not about the price anymore. It is not about the price. It is about the volatility of the price. 100% of our contracts, when anybody buys a machine of ours, the price change of the materials now bears is the client or the investor or the financier. We're pushing those risks to somebody because we cannot afford them. This is the volatility of the materials is now an issue. It's not even the price anymore. It is an inflationary response today, not because of the price, because actually some of the prices are going down in the short run. It is the risk that we are embedding on the volatility of the price of these minerals that we are putting in the contracts that we have had, and that adds a lot of cost. China, in every single technology, particularly the new technologies of renewable, China plays a dramatic role there. I will pick one, which Europeans and our company loves, is the offshore wind. Everybody loves offshore wind. It's beautiful, it's elegant, and everything else. 96% of everything that goes on there is Chinese. It is the most expensive renewable energy done by rich countries and everything else. You see the dependency there. It's a lot of protectionism. It's a lot of geopolitics and trade that we need to be very, very careful. Without them, we cannot survive. And here, again, about the value chain. The Chinese did one thing really, really, really right. They designed the supply chains in its entirety. From the mining to the processing to the use of technology, they dominate the whole spectrum, all the way into the. I do not believe that talking only about mining will do. Mining companies incur the mistake of trying to keep themselves in mining because it's so lucrative. It is a mistake. There will be no solution without looking at the entire value chain. That is called industrial policy. The biggest industrial policy in the planet today is called energy transition. And the biggest benefactor is China. They've been planning this for over 3 decades, and they did really, really well. The problem is there are risks. It is okay. However, it's not enough. The other aspect, so first aspect is the full supply chain, how it impacts inflationary and risk management of new projects, and of course, circularity is very, very important. The second is responsible mining. It is a challenge everywhere. Brazil is the place of the 2 most relevant mining accidents in the history of mining. Still there, burning. Most of the mining processes are occurring in the places, not only because they're developing countries and they're fragile economies, but where climate change will hit the most, like Brazil. Climate change, the thing that we're living now, we are already living 1.5 degrees scenario, hits disproportionately tropical countries in comparison to others. The whole mining process places will occur in these places where we have huge dislocation of population due to drought or organized crime or whatever horror that the energy transition will bring. We see governments preparing for that. Indonesia will not export nickel to China unless it's processed. Received a lot of criticism. Are they right? Are they wrong? They're fighting with the tools that they have. Chile will advance in that direction. They will ask for it. 1, 2, hey, 1, 2, 3. Attracted to go. Checking. All right. And so on and so on. Local content will be there. Local content will be there, but to handle that situation, that's also inflationary. Those are my 2 points. Technology. Green hydrogen. Who's excited about green hydrogen? We're doing our exercise. If we see, we're a very large producer of electrolyzers. Electrolyzers turn energy into and water into hydrogen. If we were successful, Isabella, we would use half of the iridium reserves of the planet. I think something is wrong, right? Iridium occurs together with platinum. Most of it is other. Is the production there? No. By a long time, no. Finally, processing, and I'm sure Emily will talk about this. Processing these special minerals is an immense environmental challenge. It is by no chance that 70–80% is now in China. We had a laxed environmental licensing of processing rules and regulations. Nobody wants that thing in its own country. We need to be much better at processing those minerals because it's horrible environmental impact. Thank you, Rafael.
Hopefully there will be no interference while I was speaking. But Leah told me that it's a problem with the channel, but hopefully it will be out. Emily, we left you like the hardest speech. I think that Isabella brought a lot of the geopolitical, climate geopolitics involved. Then we had Christoph explaining here the risks and the complexity of this finance stuff, the problems with the ups and downs in prices. And Andre brought some very important points relative to this technology and all the supply chain risks involved, and also how do we bond them? That's the big thing, like from a company, the biggest one of the biggest, if not the biggest in the world. How can we make this different in terms of providing the minerals and bonding this with sustainability and avoiding most of these risks that we mentioned?
Hopefully no interruptions this time. So, I think we've covered a lot of ground. So I'm going to try to pick up on various points as we go. And so I think the one thing I bring in ISET context is that, I've spent a majority, nearly 25 years in public policy and the extractives business. And a good friend of mine, Dan Jurgen, had made a comment not too long ago, setting the context here, is that for the last 100 years, our energy economy has been one of addition, right? We've added. Now we've entered a place where it is really a transition. So we haven't done this before. We built on and we built on, and now we're here. And so this is one of those all hands on deck moments, right? We're here, on the eve of COP, but also building up into COP 30 in Brazil, really thinking about our role in that transition. This is fundamentally different than what we have had to do before, and the price is higher, right? And so when we talk about the geopolitics, my history and my career has always found me managing the geopolitics and policies of various both developed and emerging economies. And policy is a critical enabler when you're at a point in new transition and change. We have to have partnership with government, civil society. The private sector can't do it by itself. Governments can't do it by itself. And we've reached a point in this journey, on our climate journey, where we have to stop being linear. We need to be multidimensional, and we need to be bringing the multi-stakeholders together. And so, often in the mining sector, and prior to mining, I was in oil and gas. So I've been down this road. It can't be a zero-sum game anymore. We have to be willing to find the commonalities and find and chart paths to solution, right? And so I often find myself saying, okay, what's the pragmatic middle? Where can we all come? Because it's about pace and it's about progress. And if we find ourselves stuck debating for too long, we lose time and we lose progress. And so thinking about what everyone has said, Isabella, you're right, the debate is different, right? Again, we're not adding, we're transitioning, and that means something fundamentally different in how we look at our role collectively in that journey. I'm often asked about what are the challenges for mining companies. Let's look at it. There's challenges, but there's also opportunities. So if we only come in looking at challenges, we don't make progress. We need to think of them as supporting one another, and thinking about really how we look at these challenges for a mining company. I work in the base metals part of Vale, so looking after our copper, nickel, cobalt, all of our critical minerals that really are the cornerstone to making this transition a reality. But like you said, Andre, it's not just minerals. It can't be a siloed approach any longer, right? And we have to have the tensions. We have to have the difficult conversations, right? It's what makes progress happen. And so looking at critical minerals from a pure policy perspective for the sector, like I said, I spent almost 25 years in public policy, and when was the last time we talked about mining policy? I was just in Washington not too long ago giving a similar talk. I spent the first 10 years of my career in Washington as a public policy. I can't recall a single time we had meaningful, integrated conversations on critical mineral policy, right? So again, it's time to lean in and make that change. And equally, when we look at both the global north, the global south, the developing, emerging economies, how can policy talk to one another, right? Sorry, this microphone. You guys hear me? Okay. I'm a loud talker too, so that might help. But how do policies connect with one another? All right, we'll try this one. Is he coming? All right. Let's see how far you can get. But really ensuring policies start speaking to one another. We have CBAM, we have the IRA. IRA being a huge catalyst to the conversations we're having today. But equally, how we look at the Raw Materials Act, how we look at the Indonesian export policies, right? We operate in Indonesia. I know these challenges well. But really setting a stage in the context for critical mineral development so companies can really think about that long-term plan, right? So mining is generational. We operate in decades, not days. And so thinking about how we're setting ourselves up for that long-term future and what are those challenges, right? We've talked about the geopolitical tensions. We've talked about how we need to have access to finance. And I agree fully, Christoph, on your point. As we look at our growth, we're all very familiar with the supply-demand curves right now. Demand is increasing, supply is not, and that has many facets to it. It's access to financing, trying to find public-private partnerships that move at a faster pace. It's everything to technology and innovation. I look at Brazil, for instance, in the mining sector. Vale is blessed to have great access to renewable power, including our operations in Canada, including our operations in Indonesia, right? It's 93% of our portfolio is renewable energy. So how do we tackle the next 7, right? And those are the hard to abate, costly, high cost projects. And so trying to tackle those in partnership. These are the questions and the challenges I think that face all of us, particularly on the base metals, the critical mineral side of it. And I include my colleagues in iron ore, right? High quality iron ore is essential to green steel, right? So we can't cherry pick. We need to really think about this holistically and how we move forward. And so when I reflect a little on my position in looking at the base metals strategy in the future, right? There's a few things I think apply globally into what we're doing here. We've tackled a lot today, so I won't try to go too far into them. But so I think you were spot on. Governance. Being very clear on the governance. I see this in Indonesia as well. When Western countries or the global North in general, this is a piece of feedback I get frequent. When the finger is pointed and said, you have to do this. There has to be a recognition in that governance journey that we're all starting in different places, right? And how do we get to that place? But equally, when we think about governance, what are we asking developing countries, emerging economies to achieve? We're not clear. We're not clear on the standards they're seeking, what we're holding them to account to, right? And being clear, and back to your point, using the institutions we have, the multilateral institutions we have, to really create a little bit more clarity for the developing South on what we're asking you to deliver. I think this is a real challenge in making inroads into improving, speak to the ESG standards, right? What I think and what you think might be different. If we're not setting a clear stage for that journey, we struggle to make that progress. Equally, we can't always hold perfect. It's the journey. How are we making progress? Both in the I would further say the developing countries. I mean, my American/Canadian hat on, right? There's progress to be made there, right? We have not reached these big places. And so again, for me, and from looking from a company sector, it really is that partnership and that integrated dialogue on how we collectively do that. I can have a roadmap, but it's really important for me to understand your roadmap and how we're coming at these problems together. And I think about what we do in base metals, and I'll think about Brazil. Brazil has an abundance of mineral resources. They have an abundance of beautiful biodiversity, right? Incredible communities that are in and around mine sites. How are you factoring that all in from the start? And so I was on a panel earlier today and I was talking more about, how do you look at, are we enhancing our ambition and enabling our action, right? And I think from a corporate perspective, there's a few things I bring to the table. I think there's tactics, right? And I think where mining really needs to come and demonstrate our commitment. The proof is in our action, right? That's what you measure us against. We do what we say we're going to do. And I think looking at how we've taken a step back and looking at our own mine developments, growth is huge. There are big pipelines that not just for Vale, for many mining companies on delivering the supply that needs to come to market. How are you integrating it from the start? How are you creating the business imperative that people understand that building decarbonization at the very start, 2 years before you put anything into the ground? How are you building those and integrating those pieces from the start? And I'm not talking just decarbonization. Technology plays a vastly important role, but it's social impact, it's environmental management. We have to stop looking at ESG as decarbonization. It's a holistic package. And when I go to meet with investors and when I get questioned by governments, don't look at my progress solely on the fact that I've been able to decarbonize some of my assets, the low-hanging fruit, right? It's how is that collective picture? How am I creating mutual benefit? How am I co-developing projects that I know are coming, right? We can't do it the old way. You know, we have this opportunity to reset and restart and think differently. And that means having more equity, more conversations, more dialogue about what that means for others, right? And I think it's a fantastic opportunity and not a challenge. Often people ask me, they frame that as a challenge. To me, it's not. I think it's a fantastic opportunity that if I would have put my oil and gas hat on 10 years ago, that would have been a fantastic way to start, being able to have that constructive dialogue, being able to build those building blocks into how you mine, how you think about mining, but also, you know, in my experience in Canada, you know, I really hold true to this in my own life. I'm new to Canada. I've been in Canada about a year, and I've met many of the First Nations in the country. And their first question to me is, when you think about mine development, how do you think about well-being? And I think 7 generations. So when you think about how you're building these assets, you know, keep that in mind. My participation, your participation, right? So creating that culture of mutual benefit and co-development, right? But equally, we have to get to the tactics again. It's financing. You know, we need to create policy. We need to create that, you know, partnerships with financial institutions, governments, you know, civil society NGOs, right? But mining needs access to sustainable financing, you know, because we're back to the conversation on pace and progress. It allows us to move at pace and make progress. And we've far too long, we've done everyone in the extractive sector as a whole. It's linear. We're going to do this to get here. We don't have time to do that anymore. We really need to be a multitasker. As a mother, I can't not but be a multitasker. And again, back to Andre's point about supply chain, stop being linear. We need to be integrating our thinking across that whole value chain, you know, from mine to motor. We're talking EVs, you know, what does that look like? But also setting up the regulatory frameworks to enable those things, right? I think across the world, you know, critical mineral policy in the way we're thinking about it is nascent. You know, we really need to think about how we're constructing those policies to be useful and guideposts for what those next generational developments needs to be. And so clear regulatory frameworks and stability. That's what mining companies need when we think about our investment. Access to sustainable financing. Capital allocation is very important to our shareholders, but equally it is fundamental to how we build our work plans around decarbonization, growth, sustainability in general. And then looking at that environmental footprint. Right? We've talked about Indonesia, we've talked about Brazil. I mean, it is our core license to operate. If you are not focused on environmental management and building in biodiversity and nature plans, looking at your water management and effluents, you know, this is just good business. And it is something that we shouldn't be asked to do. It's something we do. And, you know, and I think I look at, you know, I'll personal here, I look at Vale and the base metals business. And I think we do an extraordinary job, particularly on water. And how we look at it. You look at Indonesia and the work that has been done in Indonesia. One of the most, I'm incredibly proud of the water management in our operations in Indonesia. Please come to Indonesia as well. In Brazil, it's amazing how we've been able to really manage the environment and water challenges there. But again, these are all things that we need to factor in. And you know, I'll wrap it up with saying this cannot be a private sector problem. It has to be a multi-stakeholder challenge that we address together because it is simply too big and too new. And so if we're not willing to be comfortable with those tensions and talk about those tensions and find those solutions, you know, there can be great critical mineral policy out there, but it doesn't evolve. It doesn't move the conversation forward. And if we use COP as that driver, you know, that is absolutely something we need to really take into account. And I'm a firm believer, and I say this not lightly, cross-sectoral partnerships, non-traditional partnerships. The people you never thought would get along or have a conversation. That's where we start. We need to bring the different tensions together. We need to create that path forward. And, I truly believe we can move at pace and deliver low carbon, sustainable, quality mining. We have to do it in partnership.
So much to really absorb. We're already in lack of time, but I just wanted to frame something here that we've heard a lot. So the importance of the political policy in place and how governments are going to come together, stop the silo conversation. We need to have and move forward with a global mining policy. Sustainable finance will need to come in place. And of course, the private investment is not going to come along with all this instability. So how does government come along and multi stakeholders to bond this together, the cross-sectoral conversation, which I do believe is important in all segments. I've seen this in the oil and gas business, and definitely in mining it's important. The environmental and the social footprint. With that, a round of applause to this panel and to the audience. Yes. Ghost is here.
But may I add my last comment? Because to summarize the simple sentence, let's forget PowerPoint and let's ground this, okay, please.
A picture of the panel and then we'll move to the second one. I'll present the second one. So in front, I think here, just to have like but yeah, just second. In the front, the guys in the front, the photo. Here? Here.
Aqui na frente da mesa.
Yes.
Yeah, get in the middle.
No.
Andrea can only be in the middle. 1, 2, 3, and great. Thank you.
Emily, I work a lot with you. We can talk later.
So hopefully the ghost is out. And with that, I would like to call for the second panel, which we will continue some important discussions here about the sustainable development of this important supply chain, future trends, and governance. So Tom, I won't be able to pronounce your surname correctly, but research scholar for the Center on Global Energy Policy and adjunct associate professor at Columbia University. Danielle Abdo, Director of Business Development at Sigma Lithium. Bruno Pelli, Global Mining Technical Service Director at Valley. Tate McDonald at Holland Knight. And Lisa Sack, Director of Columbia Center of Sustainable Investment. Oh, you're here. Where's Lisa? Oh, you're here. So thank you very much. And me again as a moderator. So during our first panel, we heard a lot about the challenges, the technology, the necessity of the supply. I'll invert here some of the orders. Actually, I'll start with Tom. From Tom, from your perspectives, what does it take to ensure the sustainable supply chain? After this first panel, lots of thoughts came along, but I'm definitely sure you have a lot to add on that.
Right. Thank you very much.
Does the microphone work? Goes up and down the way I do. Good. Yeah, so what does it take to sort of guarantee the sustainability of the supply chain in 7 minutes? Let me start by saying, I think for any sort of sustainability competition, so first about defining what sustainability is. And having that sort of regulatory certainty and then the subsequent fiscal discipline. And I think we're missing both. It sounds very basic to say we need to define what sustainability is. What within sustainability is a red line that we consider something that we consider more priority than other things. And I don't think we're having that conversation just yet. We have great standards that are coming up. Obviously, we have the ICMM consolidated standards coming up. Is it better? Thank you. The ICMM consolidated standard is coming up in the next 3 weeks for public comment. So that's good. Because right now it's a bit of a some problem. And that's a problem when it comes to defining sustainability. Right? What do we care about? And that's a conversation that people and definitely regulators are currently not having enough. The second part, I think, is then to move to actual implementation of sustainability. We're currently having two big announcements. The first one is, as we've been hearing in the first session as well, we need new projects. And there's currently not that much investment in. I was in a meeting yesterday with a regulator who was saying, yes, but we see all those mergers and acquisitions, that actually very good news. Because that means that we will have strong companies to invest in new projects that will basically do more responsible mining. Personally, I think mergers and acquisitions are happening to avoid. And I think the miners in the room will, I hope, not fully disagree with that. Most of the major miners, over 70% of their earnings are actually coming still from coal and iron ore. And transitioning into future sort of forward-looking minerals and supply chains is not something that's done that it's very risky. It's a bearish market. There's tiny overcapacity in some of those minerals, so you're stuck with that simple conundrum that we're actually asking miners to do things better with more investment, while at the same time you have a bearish market with overcapacity. And regulators that have not yet intervened enough to say, look, we are going to favor your supply, your responsible supply. And if that doesn't come, quite frankly, I can't see that implementation of those standards of that sustainability move as quick as we all here hope that it would. Because that's linked to that second problem, which is, do our consumers of critical minerals currently require that they're mined responsibly? It's a preference, but it's not a requirement at the scale that we would need to really transition into responsible mining. Final consumers of electric vehicles are not looking at that yet. OEMs are not really heavily favoring responsible mining yet. So you come down to basically we need regulations and we need governance to facilitate that offtake. Because ultimately it all comes down to the offtake. If you don't have a guaranteed offtake, you're not going to get the financing for creating more responsible supply chains. And vice versa, if you don't have financing, you're actually not going to secure the offtake. That's the classic chicken and the egg game that we're currently seeing with supply chains. And it seems that we're not getting out of that chicken and egg game, so you need a regulator to intervene to facilitate that. My final point then is on what do we need right now, right? What could we sort of look at and experiment with on the policy side and on the financing side. Let me start with that later part. Financing part. It was nice to hear Emily say maybe we need sort of conversations with people that actually we don't have conversations with yet, right? One aspect that you could think about with respect to financing is thematic bonds or other asset classes that haven't been tapped into well enough yet. The International Energy Agency actually says, oh, we need to be looking at thematic bonds for better ESG performance of mining. What we see historically, and my colleague James is here as well, and I just published a commentary yesterday, although I read it very much. on thematic bonds and actually showing that thematic method not used that much by miners, right? Why is that? What could be done to maybe improve that? On the regulatory side of things, I think there's now a very clear obsession with China, right? The good news is that sort of an obsession with diversifying your supply chain away from China and having more ESG compliance, ESG performance mining, there's a big overlap, right? That Venn diagram has a big center, and that's good news. You can think about things like stockpiling, floor price mechanisms, all of those things are being discussed in Washington, D.C., in Brussels to a certain extent as well. There's not a lot of detail yet to how this would look like, right? And I would argue that there's also a lot of risks with these type of policies. But there's also a role there for more responsible supply. Same thing for market and subsidy access. Some of the conversations that we are having, again, with Washington about potential trade agreements around critical minerals, basically is how can we define those trade agreements with very strong environmental and social standards, right? Okay, now we're having a conversation, right? Now we're looking into Irvine, ICMM, and what type of standards they might matter the most that you could integrate in a very specific critical minerals agreement, if you wish, with third countries. And this is the type of stuff that matters, right? That's how you can actually favor certain countries with more environmental and social standards over others. I think if you look at very simple case studies, and again, I don't want to do the PR for Vale here, but if you compare Vale's projects in Indonesia with some of the more conventional projects, I mean, these performance on environmental standards is really radically different, right? And there's other examples here in the room, and Daniel will speak next about their performance in Brazil. Same thing. So you need to have those regulatory instruments to be able to discriminate between those projects and facilitate the uptake, especially that facilitate the uptake of the more responsibly mined minerals. You got something.
It's working. So thank you so much. And we said it's easy, but it's really complex because on the one side, you mentioned that, and it's the same for oil and gas. It's the same for when moving to transitioning to the renewables, guaranteeing the offtake and guaranteeing the offtake with a different pricing because it will have the ESG premium. Who's going to pay for it? So that's the big elephant in the room that we have to discuss. And as more we get together, these different stakeholders, that's the type of transparent discussions we need. So with that, before getting to the examples, because we have Sigma, we have Valley here, I'd like to listen to Tate about a bit about the regulatory challenges.
Hear me? Okay. Kind of up and down, but hello, I'm Tate McDonald. I'm going to speak with that.
Yeah.
I'm a partner here at Holland Knight, but
Let's try this one because
There's a lot of people within the
online.
Yeah,
do
let's.
you want me to try this one? See if this is that.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm a partner at Holland Knight in the DC office. So I'm actually going to speak more about the policies, and I too struggled with the definition of sustainable, but I think I'm going to hit the mark okay for today. So I am a partner in the DC office, and I specialize in public funding and programs specifically in the battery space. So about a third of our work is in this development of the supply chain. And to date, we've been successful. Obviously, there have been discussions a lot around IRA programs and programs already in place. We've helped a lot of companies navigate that funding, most recently with the announcement made this week. DOE granted another $3 billion of funding to minerals and materials. But the key now, so there's always been a lot of discussion over the past 3 years since these programs passed. Sorry, I'm struggling with this microphone. Since the programs passed on exactly what are we going to do to get the programs allocated? How do we build these facilities? How do we make them financeable? So that to date has been happening through a few key programs. The program that I just mentioned, that's just announced, that is grant funding through the US federal government. So that's 40207 of the bipartisan infrastructure law, $6 billion for these projects. Then you have the loan programs that the US has set up. Although, again, a lot of talk. I'm not going to go through that because those have all been around for a while and are well known. The discussion now really is how are we going to secure these projects, and how are we going to secure that investment that the US is making to develop a sustainable supply chain. And what's happening in DC right now that a few folks have already alluded to is really this discussion about the demand side and the stockpile and how we create programs around that. And I will say, we're not great at it. So, and there's really no working precedent here. So it's going to be a challenge. But what's really critical about this point in time is that this is the first time the US is trying to do it. So before, when we looked at like the solar supply chain and we looked at solar financing and onshoring in the US, it was okay when China was doing what they are doing now. Now, in batteries and materials, we've worked so hard to get the supply chain and fund and finance these projects. But now we need new programs that we've never really created before to secure this investment. So obviously, anything that's new is hard in the US and with government programs and support. But what we've started to see is examples in the hydrogen demand side from the Hydrogen Hub program, that a portion of the previously allocated bipartisan infrastructure law funding was set aside for demand side programs associated with those initial investments. So that's what we're working on in the battery space now, is looking at those initial investments and the allocated dollars and saying, what can we do with some of the funding that's left to secure the round one projects that were announced in October 2023. So that is what's in process right now, and that is actually easy. It's not the hardest thing to deploy right away, but that's going to be a Band-Aid. That's just going to be the first step in this process. So number one will be using that remainder of funding that's appropriated from the US Congress today to look at how we secure that initial investment. Number 2 and 3 are moving into the next stages. Are we going to do a stockpile? Are we going to do a larger demand side program? That is still in process. But the good news is we are getting closer to. So there is a significant amount of discussions on Capitol Hill. What is comforting to me is this is really one of the only bipartisan areas in the industry that we're really seeing get a lot of traction and will probably be seamless if we have a change in administration. So the bottom line is there's discussion out there, but it's really happening on the ground in Washington with regard to the demand side programs. It's just not going to be as fluid as even the development of the programs whether they're grants or the loan guarantee programs, because we've never done a demand side program. But what's great about this space and this sector in particular is it is an absolute necessary for the US government, especially after they've made these investments. So work in progress, but you are going to start to see announcements on the initial program probably soon. There was rumors that they may have been last week. Obviously that got pushed because it didn't happen. And I can't talk about that here, but there are programs in process as well as follow-on legislation that will be much more robust than the programs in process. So it's out there.
Good news is that we are progressing. It's still lots to come. And it's funny because you're mentioning this with the US, but if we move around the world, like the discussions around how do we bond this and build this new business models, the models that will come like energy and then the technology and then who's going to supply these and creative financing for that so that we are able to be competitive with different standards. So that's the huge thing.
And what we're saying before we leave is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let's start with a smaller program and then move on from there.
No, totally, yes. So the pilots, like the pilot projects and showcasing this to the world. So with that, I will start with Danielle from that has done a lot in terms of sustainable lithium. And if you can bring like the challenges, the practices, and what's going on.
Sure. Hello?
I wouldn't think that was.
Hello? Okay. Wait. Hello?
Hello, there we go. So let me start by building on a point that was brought up by Christoph earlier. That, you know, to have sustainable mining, you can't have sustainability without traceability. And that becomes a real issue in terms of the supply that we're seeing in the market today. And that has led lithium prices to tank, literally, just because the market is flooded with untraceable products. So having said that, how do we address this issue for our clients? We call our product Quintuple Zero Green Lithium, and that's just in the spirit of transparency. Why Quintuple Zero? First, we are the first operations globally that has zero tailings dams in lithium. We simply adapted existing technologies in the sector in order to dry stack these tailings. Also, we use zero hazardous chemicals in our plant. Our green tech plant uses a process called dense media separation to extract the spodumene mineral, which contains a lithium oxide from the ore by a dense media separation. So we use inert chemicals in order to do this. Third zero, we use zero dirty power. We have a 5-year contract with the power company in the state of Minas Gerais that guarantees supply from renewable sources, namely hydro, solar, and wind. Fourth zero, we use zero drinking water, which is a real problem in other lithium jurisdictions in the world. In our case, we pump water from a river 5 kilometers away from our operations, whose quality is improper even for industrial use. So we established a water treatment station right at the entrance of our plant, where we treat the water, and then this water is fully recirculated in the plant circuit until it's evaporated. And finally, we are zero carbon, because the carbon footprint in our operations are only in the mining part. It's in the diesel used in the trucks, and today we use about 15% biodiesel. Our goal is to try to reach 50% by 2026. And in the explosives used in the mine, which we use computer simulations to try to optimize and minimize the impact. So that's the Quintuple Zero there. And then the other thing that's important to say, we're talking about circularity. Our plant has 3 outputs: the high-grade concentrate product, which is our main product we sell. There is a low-grade product as well, which is in the tailings, which also contains lithium content. And these tailings can be upcycled and used in, products that do not require as highly pure lithium as batteries for EVs. So for portable electronics and things of that nature. And third, the output from the dense media separation is a coarse gravel with no economic value. So we simply donate that to the municipalities in our surroundings in order to pave the rural roads. So there's, full use of everything that comes out of the plant. Now, everything that I'm saying here wouldn't have been possible without the buy-in of the communities where we are. Our operations today, we're in the northeast of the state of Minas Gerais. It's one of the regions in Brazil with the lowest human development indices in the country, extremely poor area. So instead of when thinking about the social aspect of the operation, instead of doing donations and contributing materially, we think about creating opportunities for the people in these communities to be able to grow alongside with us. So simple measures that go a long way. We use 40-ton trucks instead of 100-ton trucks, which is more of a standard in the industry, because it's easier to train people to drive these trucks, and therefore we can create more jobs. For the women in the region, we created a microcredit program, which started with 500 women, where they get 2,000 reais, that's less than $400. And today the program has over 2,000 women. Also, during construction phase, we have over 1,000 people on our site. And after the construction is over, we have programs with the local universities to train these construction workers to become welders, equipment, drivers, and et cetera, et cetera. So with that, I'm just trying to say that you have to think, the previous panel talked about, thinking wholesome about the project, and this is how we've gone about doing it.
And we'll get back to you because actually before moving to Danielle, if you can explore a bit and the challenges with the pricing, because Sigma is an example that is doing the best it can in terms of sustainability. But then in terms of competitiveness, it's challenging if you're doing the right and then there are other companies that are just selling and are not in the same basis. So how is Sigma dealing with that?
So the supply issue we already addressed, right? I mean, a lot of the untraceable materials will drop the price. But with the pricing drops, these untraceable materials are also more costly to recover lithium from. So these operations, there's high inventory right now, and these inventories are slowly being destocked. But having said that, the way we price our product is on the lithium hydroxide curve. Historically, our competitors have priced this at about 7% of the price of the hydroxide curve. We've been able to achieve about 8.5% to 9%, given that our product is really differentiated.
So I'd also like to hear from you, Bruno, relative to what Vale's been able to do within the segment.
Okay, thank you. Basically, to start, I think we need to discuss how we miners can help the world to decarbonize. And I see three paths, actually. One has been widely discussed here, that's in energy transition. How can we supply critical minerals for energy transition? And we have our base metals business that Emily discussed about. But we cannot forget the second, and Andre touched that, how we decarbonize full value chains, industrial value chains. Basically, if I add up iron ore and steel and cement, we get to almost 20% of global emissions in those two. Iron ore is still about 8%. It's whereas a case example, Vale chose to build what we call mega hubs with our clients, basically supplying high quality iron ore using our agglomeration technologies. And basically, via that, we can, with our clients, produce low carbon steel, moving to green steel. That's how we can address in collaboration with societies, clients, and we do believe in this approach. And the question to you is that we debate critical minerals as lithium, copper, nickel, the ones we also produce. But high quality iron ore is super critical to decarbonize the world. And few countries are putting that on the list. Canada is one, and I provoke that Brazil should be one. We have the largest high quality reserves in the world, and maybe because it's so abundant to us, we don't see as critical, but it's super critical for the world. And cement as well, we built a green cement business using iron ore tailings or iron ore waste to produce cement. And that's one of the businesses that we expect to launch soon. And going more into circularity, we designed the mine of the future for Vale, and basically a mine of the future, super sustainable, connected, autonomous, and the workforce that remains is super qualified. And one of the things that we do need to improve as miners is to be less invasive. We need to mine with smaller footprints, generating less impact. And that's why I do believe that we need to be zero waste, zero tailings, and carbon neutral, and sharing value with societies. And a key way to do that is via circular mining. And that's where we built our circular mining program. It's called Waste to Value. And we have been reprocessing tailings dams We have one in Amazon that's called Gelado. Basically, nameplate capacity of 10 million tons per annum from tailings, products similar quality, and via circular means. We have been also reprocessing waste. A lot of test work being done around the globe to really use our waste as product. We, as Vale, are one of the largest producers of sand right now in Brazil. So with improvement in processing, the tailings that remains is much cleaner. And we are able to sell this year more than 1 million tons of sand into the Brazilian markets. We are also producing bricks for construction. We are also developing a line, as I said, of cement. We are in tests with Embrapa of a fertilizer from waste rock from Carajás. Those are the circular use that we as miners, we need to deliver to society. If we don't deliver that, we will not earn our social license to operate. And just to provide some numbers, some real numbers from us, this year we expect 2% of our production will be from circular sources, next year 4, 2030, 10. And just calculating the benefit of circular mining in terms of CO2 savings, and that's why the third piece of decarbonization for miners is to decarbonize ourselves. It's 1.2 million cars in these 10 years. It's equivalent, the saving CO2, to 1.2 million cars running a year at the European cycle. So that's massive. And several times, in terms of circularity, we keep debating recycling, and I'm not saying that it's not needed. Actually, I'm one of the people that I have been defending heavily to recycle materials in the industry, but we need to do the process circularity, the better use of what we have. Mining, we use a finite resource. If we don't use it well, with less waste, less tailings, with better recoveries, it will finish, the cost will skyrocket, and we will not be able to supply critical minerals that the world needs. And that's from our case.
I'll steal your mic. So thank you very much. And with both what Daniel and you said, Bruno, there's a lot of challenges within the responsible governance, and Tate also mentioned that. Lisa has been doing a lot of work within the governance space. If you could bring us some light to that, Lisa, it would be lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The privilege, but also the challenge of being last is that I had prepared remarks, but forget it. I want to respond to all the incredibly thoughtful and interesting comments that my fellow panelists and also the earlier speakers made. As you said, I've been working in this space for a very long time, more than 15 years. And for 15 years, we've been saying that mining is at the heart of the Sustainable Development Challenge. Frankly, we've been saying that since before the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted. As I was sharing with my Vale friends here, and Patricia and others know our history, it was the former CEO of Vale, Roger Agnelli, that sat with us when our program was two of us with an idea at Columbia, and we sat together in 2007 and thought about the importance of actually thinking about what it would take to get this right. What does it look like to meet the mineral needs of our society, but in a way that achieves broader sustainable development? And that has been what we've been trying to do for 15 years. We were delighted when the Secretary General announced the UN panel on critical minerals for the energy transition, because again, many of us had been saying it's bizarre that we have a climate goals, we have COP, and we don't have a special track to look at the role of critical materials. These are core, not only, by the way, to the energy transition, but to many other sustainable development transitions more generally: transportation, digitalization, automation, urbanization. Critical minerals are central to all of those sustainable transformations, and they require real international collaboration and real thinking about how to get this right. So we were absolutely delighted when that was announced, and warmly welcome the principles, but really hope that this is a starting point, frankly, for the discussions that need to be had, and far from an ending point. part of the reason that we've said that mining is at the heart of the sustainable development goals, actually, I would say that there are 3 reasons. Maybe 2 reasons, but one of them has 2 parts. One is because of the products they produce. We've just discussed that, not only the critical materials, but sand, cement, literally the products they produce are the products of our lives and our societies. But the other is because of the processes and both the potential for transformative sustainable development, because these are large, long-term, capital-intensive, infrastructure-intensive projects that have the potential to transform societies, but also the potential for other types of social environmental impacts. And I want to say, even though I want to end on a hopeful note, because I do have hope and because we have incredible minds working on these issues, is that we should take stock of our track record for the past 15 years. And as we have new conversations, which I warmly welcome, about critical minerals and the energy transition and sustainable development transformations, we should be honest about the challenges that we've faced over the past 15 years. And that despite, by the way, even the incredible, and I've seen and I can attest to the not only intentions, but the resources that many leading mining companies, not all, but many leading mining companies have put into really trying to engage with local communities, with national governments, with international processes, and so on. The challenges persist, and they are really complex. And I think we really need to look back and try to understand why. What are these? What has not gone right? By the way, Daniel, I think, mentioned that the mine is in one of the poorest regions in Minas Gerais. That's true all around the world. Most mining projects, sorry, I don't know my statistics. Many mining projects take place in the poorest regions of those countries, where the mining projects are the potential springboard for development or the last opportunity. And then they're left dealing with environmental and social strife after. So I would just encourage us all, and I did, as I've engaged with the wonderful panel members, many of whom are very close friends and collaborators for many years, that I see two conversations two strands of conversations that I encourage us to have going forward. One is that as we now unite to implement these guiding principles and to look at what responsible supply chains look like and how do we actually achieve sustainable development, that we have honest, difficult conversations around what has been difficult in the past. And I will say again, as somebody who has worked very closely with different stakeholder groups, with the companies, with the governments, with the communities, genuinely good, well-intentioned, and smart people can have different perspectives on what the challenges are. There are some difficult areas around what is a fair deal, what's fair taxation. I'm looking at Thomas, who's been a leader on this for many years. What does consent look like? How do we manage environmental impacts that are not, we don't have good solutions for those yet. So on one hand, I hope that we can have conversations around some of the difficult tensions and trade-offs and complexities on which reasonable minds can disagree, and I think underlie many of the continued challenges in the sector. And then there are the new opportunities and the new questions and the new imperatives that are presented by the surge in demand for the energy transitions, the ecological constraints, and so on. I think what Vale has done on circular economy is extraordinary, and we should learn from it and seek and think about how to strengthen the ecosystem to enable and encourage policies like that across the board. And I think there's a lot of research there. My colleagues and I worked with ICMM, and including Vale and many of ICM's members, to start the conversation around circular practices and the policy framework that could support those. So there are new challenges and new opportunities, supply chains, and offtake agreements and so on. I would put in that category new technologies where we can try to innovate for the future. So very much look forward to continued work with all of you and to pursue both of these strands of conversation.
Let's see. Thank you so much, Vita. And a lot being said, and just falling to us that so much that we have to really bring together these different and multi-stakeholders to really move this forward and get like these great examples and showcase them and see how they can be applied in different areas. So things happening in Brazil, how can this bond with things happening in Indonesia, a better form of exploring these critical minerals in a just way and aligned with a just transition towards Africa and so on and so forth. So great, great thoughts. We're into the end, but I'd like to see if someone from the audience would like to do a question. Otherwise, I will leave Benjamin Jadon, which is Director of Latin America Program in Wilson Center, with the hard challenge to sum everything we've and the key takeaways. But let's see if we have any questions. Oh, here we are.
Can you hear me? Thank you so much for all of these.
Talk loud, is that okay? No?
Okay. Thank you so much for all of these insights. I want to pick up on something, Lisa, that you mentioned and a couple others around the relationship between these sites and project sites being also in the most climate risky, vulnerable, lowest income places. Those often tend to be the ones who are either on this pathway to development or where there's this last ditch resort for development, economic development opportunity. These are also the communities that have the highest burden of adaptation, in addition to this interplay with the transition. So I'm curious if there's any way that this is expressing itself in your work, and how we might bring some of those conversations and stitch those a little bit more closely together, if that's coming up at all.
Do you want to start? I'll try to be very brief and suggest two things. One, that mining companies, some are, and that we've worked with mining companies to do, and then a more general answer to your question. One is that we've worked with some mining companies to integrate data-driven development into their community engagement, their regional projects. So to really understand, to use SDG indicators and so on, to really understand what the constraints and the challenges are in the communities, which should reveal some of the constraints that relate to climate vulnerability that would help to inform more effective interventions and so on. That's my somewhat simplistic answer, because my real answer is that this sector has long been siloed from the broader sustainable development conversations and national strategies, public investment programs, and more. Part of that is because there's this perception that when the mining companies that are well-resourced are working in these areas, they should be able to, or they are expected to, or look to take on some of the social and environmental needs of the community. But I don't think that that's the right approach. Really extending public services, managing broader vulnerabilities, but also the sustainable development needs of communities, really belongs in a national plan. And the challenge that I don't think we've done effectively is how do mining projects and how can mining companies support and fit into those national plans. Often those plans don't exist. Countries don't have them. They're not well supported to do them. They don't necessarily have the resources to invest. As you and I have discussed, they don't have the tools to know how to effectively invest in adaptation and so on. And so in my ideal, we have a framework where the mining companies can support in some way or engage in national policy together with other regional development partners and so on to support the government in extending those types of services and investments to mining communities. And actually, one of our very first projects with Vale, again with Agnelli, with CEO Agnelli in 2008 or 2009, was doing kind of just that in Mozambique, where there was where Vale had an investment in the coal fields in Tete province. And they supported our team to help develop a broader national resource-based development strategy for the government, thinking about the legal framework, the fiscal regime, environmental considerations, infrastructure development, community engagement, and so on, to engage with the government. It was supported by Vale, but the project was to engage with the government on thinking about how to leverage these resources for broader development. So I think that model could usefully be replicated.
Right.
Does anyone want to?
Something up? Anyone want to pick up?
282.
Oh,
Sorry.
the ghost again. But then I'll leave it to you to sum up now, Benjamin, our final words and remarks. So applauses for this panel.
Break that sound.
There we go.
2, 1, 2. Is it better? 1, 2, 2. 2, 1.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Best. It's like very best.
Excellent. So I'm Benjamin Gadan. I direct the Latin America program at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington. This was a terrific event. I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate your participation. We held this in partnership with these fantastic institutions, CEBRI in Brazil and Holland Knight, Columbia University, and other colleagues. And so we're really grateful for having had this opportunity to collaborate. Though I direct the Latin America division, it's a global institution, and across the institution, we focus quite a bit on critical minerals with some of the same partners who are working in Latin America, working in Africa, and elsewhere. And so I think having this global perspective was exceptionally useful. We have a couple of events coming up that I can't help but promote here. We'll be in Buenos Aires in early October talking about the energy transition, the role of Latin America. That's renewables and green hydrogen, but also critical minerals. So let me know if any of your institutions are interested in working with us on that. We'll also, on the margins of the G20 Energy Ministerial in Foz do Iguaçu, we'll also be there, and some of you are already aware of that opportunity. But in each of these cases, we look to your expertise, your companies, to provide all of the perspectives necessary to understand these challenges. I'm going to summarize very briefly because I know you have a lot, I'm sure, to do around town during this exciting week in New York City. But there's a few things I think that were really clear to me throughout this conversation. One is that this issue is not a fad, right? That this is an issue, despite decreases in prices lately that have had some effects I'll mention on investment, that the energy transition is happening. It is real. It is accelerating in many cases. And the critical minerals conversation will have to be an important piece of that throughout. I think what we heard is a sense of urgency that, as was described, that mining is a generational project, that the runway needed for these projects to be done and done well requires lots of strategic planning and thinking. And so, these conversations themselves have to accelerate and the capital has to move much more quickly. And that this is complicated, right? That the local community considerations are not simple, that mining, as we just heard, typically takes place in most of the poorer regions in countries, that there are conflicts between countries and regions, but within countries, that the environmental issues from waste, from energy use, from water use, these are all not simple and not cheap to address, but have to be a part of the conversation, particularly if we're to avoid a lot of the errors of the past that have given the extractives industries the kind of reputation that sometimes makes it difficult to have the social license that we've heard many times today as absolutely necessary for this to move forward. And then the questions about the local community, state, and country needs that sometimes are overlooked. We've heard from Christoph that 85% of investment in renewable energies is happening in developed countries and in wealthy communities, and that local needs themselves when they come to energy are often ignored. And so energy poverty, the lack of access to energy of any sort, remains an issue. And so while we accelerate in the production of clean energy and the minerals needed for it, we can't have that only from the perspective of wealthy countries that are generating the demand and providing the capital. Just not only are there questions of justice, but also of social license again, and of the ability to work with the governments where a lot of these minerals are found. As I mentioned, I specialize in Latin America. That's not incidental to this conversation. When it comes to lithium, it's more than 60% of the global supply is found in just 3 countries in South America. in Argentina and Bolivia and Chile. As you know well, Brazil has many of these minerals themselves, graphite and nickel and rare earths and lithium as well. Sigma is represented here today. But it's a region, I think, that's a good case study for a lot of what we just heard. A region where we've seen resource nationalism with these resources and previous ones. We've heard about Indonesia today, but you could say the same about Bolivia, Mexico, which nationalized its lithium resources, the approach which is mixed in Chile. The anti-extractivism from memories of when things were not done to the standards they're being done today. There's examples like Serbia famously for lithium, but we've also seen this in Panama, which just closed a copper mine that was a major producer of copper after nationwide protests with concerns about many factors, but among them environmental sustainability. And so the concern about whether these industries will lead to downstream opportunities in these countries. This is very much on the minds of those thinking about industrial policy throughout the world and including in Latin America, and a fear of a renewed commodity dependence and the volatility of commodity prices and what that could mean. The difficulty attracting sufficient capital for these projects, the difficult operating environment and high political risk. So all of these challenges that we heard today, I think, are not only present in the region that I specialize on, but as we just heard throughout. The speed that these projects take place in, which is slow, much slower than the demand will be. We heard quite a bit from the International Energy Agency about this very large gap between projected supply and demand for lithium, for copper, and for other critical minerals. And the fact that the regulations and laws need to keep up, and that we can't depend only on consumers and the demands that they have, that every component of clean energy technologies be produced with sustainability in mind. And that this ESG premium might have to be borne by consumers, but in fact might have to be imposed, these high standards, by regulations and laws as well, and an operating environment that permits companies to meet their own high standards, meaning that renewable energy is available, that the grids are adequate, that when countries bring high standards for ESG, that governments are not an obstacle to that in trying to meet those high criteria. And then I think the other piece that I took home from this is that there are extraordinary opportunities. I think we heard it referred to as a big prize at the end of a lot of these investments. We've talked a lot about the obstacles, about whether these minerals will be available, about environmental and social consequences. But I think the fact that there's such confidence in the direction of travel on the demand for these minerals and the ever-accelerating energy transition means that conversations like this can be optimistic, both from a private sector and from an environmental and from a government perspective. And I think so I take with me that optimism that these conversations are occurring, and they're occurring involving all stakeholders, and pretty much everyone has a lot to gain if this is done well, right? And that governments are, generally speaking, also invested in this, right? That they see this as another engine of opportunity, that this critical minerals boom, again, if handled well, could provide development opportunities at the local and national level. Again, in Latin America, I think that's true almost everywhere. The region has just suffered, a decade of very slow growth, and is eager for opportunities, again, with a desire not to have them exclusively come from commodities, but that recognizing that mining of these minerals could be a critical area for job creation, and then ideally for participating in these value chains up and down, right? And that the international community is engaged and, generally speaking, there to help. I think we've seen massive investments in these regions from China, of course. We saw the commission, the president of the EU Commission, the German chancellor, the Treasury Secretary of the United States all visited Chile in like a 6-month period last year and earlier this year. I think it's a signal of the recognition that the countries that hold these minerals need to be engaged with, need to be taken seriously, and their industrial policy interests, environmental and social considerations need to be taken into account. There's the Mineral Security Partnership and lots of other civil society and intergovernmental efforts, some of which were mentioned today, that I think are a signal that there is some strategy to all of this, and it isn't merely a scramble and a competition. And as we heard from Tate, there's bipartisan consensus in the United States on the need for these minerals to be diversified in terms of their sources and to be produced with sustainability in mind. And I don't say that lightly, as anyone following the US election and US politics knows. It's a period of extraordinary polarization, but the fact that this has now been over 2 different administrations a priority for the White House, I think is quite significant. And not only a priority in planning, but also in funding. And the historic Inflation Reduction Act for all its weaknesses and complications, I think was, it's historic for a reason. The amount of resources are really extraordinary, and the signals are pretty clear of where the U.S. economy is headed. And so those demand signals ideally will provide stability and the sense of opportunity in the future that will keep investment despite the volatility in prices that we heard quite a bit about today. I think it was a 75% reduction in lithium prices over just the last 2 or 3 years we heard. But again, I think as well, we know the direction of travel is for greater demand and eventually a price recovery on these. So the geostrategic considerations are also complex. And I want to just maybe conclude by mentioning we've heard today the dependence on China for the processing and refining of many of these materials. Some of the reactions that could make it complicated for these materials to move around the world, including US tariffs on Chinese batteries. These are EV batteries and grid batteries. The conflicting priorities that we see for desires for onshoring in Europe and the United States that can sometimes run in conflict with the desire to develop these resources in industries and economies in the developing world on places that hold these materials, EU-US cooperation, but also competition. So again, I think the role of the international community, I would say, is mixed and complex and of the wealthy economies. But I do see, again, the most positive piece of this is this consensus that it's important, the consensus that it has to be done better than some of these industries were managed in the past, the consensus that the countries that hold these minerals have to have their interests taken seriously across the board. And again, the great sense of urgency and increasing capital and attention that's being dedicated to this, whether it's from the Inflation Reduction Act, from desires for recycling, as we heard today, but above all, for the vast increase in production of these minerals and diversifying their sources, and in making sure that the social license is obtained and retained throughout the process, so that the energy transition globally can benefit the environment while all these communities and governments and societies benefit as well throughout the process. I guess coming from a civil society institution, then I'll end where I began, which is to say that conversations like this, I think, are really essential for this, where expertise is brought to bear, where private sector perspectives are here, where we talk seriously about government policies, from royalties and taxes to environmental and social considerations, are all discussed, I think, in the same fora. I think we're seeing that more and more, but still not enough. And so I'm really validated by today's event. Again, thrilled that the Wilson Center was included, and that CEBRI and our other partners invited us to be part of this. And I hope that we'll continue to play a role in these conversations from our perspective in Washington and New York and elsewhere going forward. So thank you very much for being here. I truly appreciate it. I learned a lot. I hope you did too.
Yeah.